Children are supposed to be our future. They are important assets to any nation. Unfortunately, thousands of them are living a life that is less than perfect from what an ideal childhood is. In 2013, the PNP Directorate for Investigation and Detective Management reported that 4,234 children were raped. What's even more disturbing is that 406 of these cases were committed by teenagers. In addition, the Criminal Investigation and Detection Group reported that most victims met their assailants through the internet. In fact, the National Bureau of Investigation reported that of all the cybercrime cases they handled, 46% of them are related to online child abuse. In 2012, the Department of Social Welfare and Development recorded 5,554 cases of child abuse, 500 less than the number of cases reported in 2011. And these figures are just in the Philippines. The number of violations against children has raised so much since the United Nations created the Convention on the Rights of Children in 1989. The convention required member states to acknowledge the basic and special rights and needs of children. However, not all of these rights and needs are recognized by certain individuals, groups, and countries around the world. What are the rights of children and how is the Philippine government protecting them? With childcare being so sensitive, where's the line drawn when it comes to discipline and abuse? And with the advancement of technology, how can a parent protect their child from new forms of abuse? Good evening. You're watching Legal Help Desk. This show is about making the law work for you by giving legal advice on topics that matter to you. I'm Attorney Karen Jimeno.
And I'm Attorney Rod Nepomuceno. Tonight we'll discuss the legal rights of children, what you need to know about the rights of children and the youth, and how to protect them from any acts of violation such as abuse, neglect, and exploitation, just to name a few.
Our guests for tonight are Judge Elisa Sarmiento Flores of the RTC Branch 71, Pasig City, and Attorney Carlo Florendo Castro of the Department of Social Welfare and Development. Good evening, and thank you for being with us, Attorney Carlo and Judge Elisa.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. We know it's traffic, but and it's because it's Christmas time, and because it's Christmas time, children are normally the focus of the season,
yes,
right?
Yes, of course.
Yes. So,
and most kids are blessed enough to have parents that will make sure that they really experience Christmas as a really good, and happy holiday.
Yeah.
But I think it's also when Christmas season rolls around when we see a lot of street children around, either selling or nanlilimos or begging in the streets or even caroling. So basically, perhaps you can enlighten our viewers. One, is this a form of child abuse or neglect? And second, what can we do to help the situation?
Alright.
Maybe si Attorney Carlo sa DSWD.
First of all, we don't encourage when children go begging that you give them the alms that they're asking for, because that will encourage them to go begging again.
Right.
Okay. Now, if you're really concerned, maybe the best thing is to report it to the local social welfare development office of the city or municipality where you're living in, or to a DSWD office. Then we will send social workers to go look into the situation of the children who are begging. Well, if they're there because they have no parents to take care of them, then we will take them into our fold and put them into our protective custody. If they're not, if they have parents who are not taking care of them or letting them beg on the streets, then we will provide counseling to their parents and will make them realize that it's not healthy for their children. And if the parents refuse to stop letting their children beg in the streets, then we will have to take these children into our protective custody.
What about Christmas caroling? So obviously there are the obvious na street kids, like when your car is stalled waiting for a traffic light and then kids come up just to Christmas carol. That's obviously part of the street children problem. But if you have like a house, tapos formally you have kids really coming to render Christmas carols, is that a form of child labor? Judge Elisa.
Well, when you say child labor, you are forcing children to go and work, actually, to earn money. Now, caroling per se is not a form of, it's really not a form of child labor, considering that it's for the spirit of Christmas. However, However, if the child is being used in order for, well, to get money, adults would use them to get money, then that could be also a form of child abuse.
So if you're an organization, for instance, and you organize children, and obviously, I've received some letters soliciting, can we conduct Christmas carols in your house or in your office, and then obviously it's in return for money or donations. Is that a form of child labor?
No, I don't think so, because that is for the spirit of Christmas. But we have, I have encountered a case where there is actually, I think it's an organized crime syndicate that used children to beg during the Christmas season.
Yeah, that seems to be the common thought, no? I mean, whenever we're driving and we see children begging, and usually, someone will tell you, don't give because it's a syndicate.
Yes.
I think it's safe to say not all naman
Not all,
are
yes.
with certain syndicates. Now let's take a step back. Now we're talking about children. Let's talk about what are the laws, no, that protect children. And two, my second question is, how is this enforced? Because they're children, they can't really go to court or file a case. They don't know the legalities. Let's start off with maybe perhaps the International Convention on the Rights of Children, and perhaps the VAW CEDAW. What are the laws that are pertinent to the protection of children, and thereafter, how is this enforced?
Now, when we talk about the Convention on the Rights of the Children, it is created by the United Nations, and considering that we are a member country, then we have to make sure that the basic and the special rights of children are protected. Basic, when we say basic, we're talking about survival, we're talking about education, food and shelter, how they would be treated. But when it goes to the special protection, now that's where the special laws concerning children in the judicial system or the justice system would take place. Now, particularly, we have RA 7610, which is the anti-child abuse law. And then we also have eliminating forms of violence against children. And then we also have a law wherein it states that children who are below 15 years old cannot work, except with exceptions. Okay? So aside from that, we also have RA 9208, trafficking, the anti-trafficking person, which is, it has a provision in terms of child trafficking. So that's the case wherein the organized criminals got children from the southern part of Luzon.
Right.
They go to a part of Manila and they distribute them so that they could beg. Our office before charged the felons who were arrested for trafficking.
And I think, as Attorney Carlo mentioned, if you encounter any cases like these, you can report to the DSWD as well for the protection of the children, apart from just going to court.
I could add to the laws. There are some more recent laws which adapt to the times and technology. There's the Anti-Voyeurism Act. There's the Anti-Child Pornography Act. And there's the cybercrime, the anti-cybercrime law.
Yes.
So, Attorney Carlo, if you, for instance, stumble upon a YouTube video, or an online site wherein they're using children for pornography or voyeurism, who should you report to?
Well, you can report it to any law enforcement authority.
Meaning police?
Police, NBI, and you can report it to us. There's actually an interagency council for against child pornography. We work together. There's the NBI is there, the DSWD is there, the DOJ is there. So when a case is reported, we coordinate, and the NBI has the tools to track down the perpetrators.
When you file a report, is there a legal process to it, or it's really just filing an affidavit, or is it just filling up a form?
Or can you just report talaga? Kasi obviously, that's the problem. If you put so many requirements like affidavit, then madi-discourage
all you have to do is just bring it to our attention.
So it could be a call,
even a simple email, a call, a text message.
Text hotline,
as long as we can see, if you sometimes we receive a text message, look at this website. We go to that website and we see, well, okay, this we have to investigate this, and then we get on it right away.
Okay, so it's really very convenient also for the people concerned and reporting. Judge Elisa, kanina you mentioned the anti-trafficking of persons. Christmas season, it's a very popular time for parents also to travel with children. So for those parents who are either not legally married or separated na, or there's obviously a custody battle, what are the guidelines to make sure that neither of the parents would be considered as either violating or kidnapping or yung getting the proper travel requirements?
Documents,
Yes.
Well, actually, I encountered a case before wherein the father was charged the mother with kidnapping. But, you know, if we would apply the revised penal code, if a parent would kidnap the child, the penalty will be very low. In fact, I think it's a bailable offense. Mababa lang talaga. Now, insofar as unmarried couples, according to the family code, only the mother has a right over the child. So, better yet, the father, who is the father of the illegitimate child, should file visitation rights over the child, so there will be no conflict. You know, the anti-trafficking in person naman, on the other hand, it has various reasons. The means is the reason would be for sexual trafficking, for child labor. So if it's not under that naman, then definitely the parents cannot be charged with RA 9278.
But you have to obviously get the proper travel documents, the proper approvals from the parents to make sure that you're not kidnapping.
The DSWD issues the travel clearance for children. If the child is traveling with either parent, there's no clearances required. The presumption, of course, is that everything is harmonious in the family. But if there's a custody battle between the parents, if the one parent informs us that there's an ongoing custody battle, then we will flag that. And if there's
immigration in the airport.
With our office. At the immigration, they will look for a DSWD clearance.
Okay, so that's very helpful. We'll talk about that more, because I think a lot of viewers out there are not aware of that DSWD travel clearance. Yes. And especially if the child is traveling with an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent, they're obviously not the parents. So we'll get back to that after this short break. Legal Help Desk will return after these messages. The Convention on the Rights of the Child defines child as any human being below the age of 18. There is an emphasis on the idea that a child is a human being and therefore has rights just like everyone else. The only main difference a child has from an adult human being is their vulnerability, which means they have no means to protect themselves. Children's rights are constituted by fundamental guarantees and essential human rights, and these are the right to life, the right to dignity, and the right to be protected from slavery, torture, abuse, the right to an identity, a nationality, decent standard of living, the right to health, and the right to education. In the Philippines, we have the Child and Youth Welfare Code, which is an adaptation entitling and recognizing the rights of children without distinction as to legitimacy or illegitimacy, sex, social status, religion, political antecedents, and other factors. Aside from the code, we also have the Anti-Violence Against Women and Children Act, which provides the scope of the types of violations that can be committed against women and children, and the penalties befitting them. It was Dr. Jose Rizal who said that the youth is the hope of our country, and it is our job to ensure that the hope is fulfilled by protecting them and their rights for a bright future. You're still watching Legal Help Desk with our guests, Judge Elisa Sarmiento Flores and Attorney Carlo Florendo Castro. Earlier, we were discussing the right to travel of children, but in most cases, especially the holiday season, sometimes they travel either with a parent na hindi naman married dun sa mother, or with the grandparents or the aunts and uncles. Perhaps you can enlighten us as to what documents need to be carried by the guardian or whoever is traveling with the children to make sure that there will be no problems when they get through immigration or the airport?
Well, when they get to immigration, if the child is traveling with either of the parents or both parents, they don't have to produce anything. If they're traveling with persons other than their parents, they need a clearance from the DSWD. Now, it's easy enough to get that clearance. You just go to one of our offices. I think the basic requirements are basically the birth certificate of the child, of course. If you're married, the marriage certificate of the parents. And if the child will be traveling with another adult aside from the parents, the consent of both parents must be given. Now, if the parents are estranged, you have to show the court order giving custody to one parent, and that parent should give the consent for the child to travel with the
Okay,
adult.
so at least that clarifies
Yeah,
that.
because a lot of people usually are not aware, and then they get to the airport ready to leave, and then they get stopped because they're not showing
Yes.
any of the proper documents.
Nobody's excuse.
Nobody's-
Considering that I also done that.
No,
When my child traveled, my minor daughter traveled with her aunt and uncle. I complied with that.
You complied with that. All right.
And also, I guess, if your surname is different from your children, make sure that you also bring
Your
your
their
marriage
birth certificate.
certificate. I've had a friend kasi Rod tinigil sa airport
Oh, yeah?
because she was traveling with her children and she's legally married except that she hasn't changed her name in her passport, so iba yung sa mga kids hinahanapan ng
So it could be a little tricky, no? So you have to be
Uh-huh.
careful. And remember, DSWD can't prevent you from traveling. So, all right.
Immigration.
Let's go back to the violations of children's rights. No? There are several ways, and some are quite obvious. No? Like obviously, there's the rights against cruelty, labor, exploitation, abuse. And you have, of course, trafficking and prostitution. I mean, some of those cases are quite clear cut. No? We know if obviously there's physical abuse, it's quite clear. But maybe let's talk about the gray areas. That some people may not know is abuse, but it's actually abuse or neglect under the law.
Perhaps we have to define first what child abuse is. Child abuse is maltreatment, habitual or not. So, ibig sabihin, kahit marami yan, child abuse, kahit isang beses lang yan, pwede pa rin maging child abuse. And the category are as follows. Physical abuse, of course, obviously, when there's fractured bone, laceration, and then you have psychological abuse, when the result is depression, anxiety, and then there is outward aggressive behavior also on the part of the child. Then you have sexual abuse, which is either there's a sexual intercourse between an adult and a minor, wherein there is the use of what you call this, enticement, something like that. And then you have lascivious conduct when there is the touching on the parts of the body of a minor. And then we also have exploitation. And then we also have child labor and then neglect. Now, perhaps one thing that we have to be clear is, dadaan ba sa barangayan?
Yes.
Now, it's not part of the loophole, yes.
Yeah.
It's not part of the katarungan pambarangay because the penalty is more than 1 year. That's one.
So
and then,
heavy, the
because the penalty is heavy. For me, when I was a prosecutor, I would file neglect instead of economic abuse if the one neglected is a child, since the penalty is much, much higher.
And when you talk about child abuse, for instance, physical abuse, is disciplining or corporal punishment, meaning pinapalo, is that considered child abuse?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, the gray
Yeah,
areas,
yeah.
no? The
Yeah,
gray
okay.
areas.
We'll
because-
answer that.
And sometimes
I
you
see-
have the nannies or kasambahays as well na tinatry i-discipline yung bata and they, of course, they sometimes spank them.
And
Can that be child abuse?
Minsan even verbal abuse. Is that
pag
abuse?
sinisigawan mo.
Because I see a lot of parents in the malls doing that. You know?
Okay, so let us distinguish.
Yes.
So when we say physical abuse, is corporal punishment or maltreatment of parents an act agad of child abuse? Now, it depends. Now, we know that there are punishments that are administered to children to discipline them. But it should not result to fractured bones, laceration. If it's severe, then that is child abuse. Now, I have a case before, and I really filed under Section 10A of RA 7610, and he is the adoptive father. So, because the kind of discipline he administered is so bad na mata lang yung walang latay sa bata. It's really bad,
Talagang
terrible.
physically
Yes.
violent.
But let's say in a situation na, kunyari, palo, di ba, sinasabi na, but then palo could be a little bit of a slap, patok. Yung mga ganun ba, kasi like for example in the States, no, there are threats now na parang, don't harm me or I'm gonna call 911.
Yes,
I have had situations where children would call 911 and the parents will, will be arrested by the police.
Now, there's a recent jurisprudence, it's last May of 2013, wherein the Supreme Court distinguished what child abuse is from that of slight physical injuries. So not all cases of physical harm involving a minor is actually child abuse. So it really depends
On
upon
the degree, no, I
the
guess.
degree.
All right. We have some questions from our viewers from Miranda. I suspect a neighbor's nanny of abusing her 4-year-old son. We live in a condominium building and I would often hear her son crying and the nanny yelling through the walls. Aside from telling my neighbor about my suspicions, what else can I do to prove my suspicions? Yeah, what
Can
can
I take this?
DSWD.
I'm not sure, but we've had a similar experience. It's happened in a condominium. They were suspecting that their neighbor was abusing the child. What they can do actually is, they can report it to the police. They can report it to the DSWD. We cannot take immediate action. We cannot just barge in and get the child. But what we will do is, we will go there. Then we will ask politely, how is the child doing? We will look into how the child is doing. And if there is abuse, then we will take legal action. We will file a case for involuntary commitment and get a court order to have the child given to our custody. If the parents or whoever is taking care of the child refuse to cooperate, then we will go to court and get the proper order to allow us to go inside and look after the child.
So basically, the DSWD is an effective agency to contact in order to protect the child if you're also suspicious of any forms of child
They
abuse.
can also contact, like I said, the local social welfare development office because, I have to clarify, the DSWD only has offices up to the regional level. The local social welfare development offices are under the local government
LGUs.
units.
And we're flashing the numbers that any concerned citizen can call in case of any suspicions of child abuse.
Yes,
So you can call that number. Our next question is from Jamie. I commute daily and I often see children singing, beating a makeshift bongos, or passing around envelopes inside jeepneys. Is it possible for me to bring a child or two to the nearest DSWD office even if the child doesn't want to? Will I be violating their rights even if I'm actually looking out for their welfare?
Well, if they do that,
Baka
they can actually be charged with kidnapping.
Mahirap yun, no?
But I think I mentioned this earlier. What they can do is they could report it to us, and then we can go there and look at the circumstances of the child.
So basically, don't take the law into your own hands. No? Just try to remember saang location mo nakita, ano yung circumstances. And earlier, up to now, we're flashing some of the numbers that they can call for child protection. So
Can you
just
go-
report na lang.
If there's a nearby police, you can go to police and point it out, right?
Because even the DSWD, even our social workers cannot just go to the streets and get children, bring them to our centers. We have to look first. Well, of course, except for very young children. There are very young children in the streets and no one's taking care of them. Of course, we can take them. Anyone can take care of them.
Thank you for clarifying that, Attorney Carlos. So yung mga nagmamagandang loob na viewers natin, be careful, baka ma-charge pa kayo ng kidnapping.
Correct.
We'll be back to answer more viewers' questions. Legal Help Desk will return after this short break. You're still tuned in to Legal Help Desk with our guests, Judge Elisa Sarmiento Flores and Attorney Carlo Ferrando Castro.
Okay, so maybe we should talk about, again, we were talking about children's rights, no, the violation of children's rights. But of course, they can't go and file on their own. Who can file on their behalf cases of abuse?
Well, under the law, of course, we have if it's reported in the hospital, there is a situation there, so the heads of the hospital should report.
Okay.
Now, if it's reported in the school, But under the law, it's just public school.
Public school,
Then we have the law enforcement officer, particularly the Women and Children Protection Desk. So we have that in our country. Specialized yun, sila talaga yung tatanggap. And then we have parole officer also. And then we have government lawyers. And then we also have those who have personal knowledge, at least one out of a group of 3 who has personal knowledge about what happened. So they could report cases of child abuse.
Why is that rule? I'm curious about that rule. 1 out of 3. It's a group of 3 reporting, and then 1 will report.
Oh, yes. So there would be a 1 out of the 3 would execute a sworn statement.
I see. Okay.
And if you're a teacher, for instance, and you're noticing that even if you're just suspicious that one of your students seems to be a victim of child abuse by the parents or kasambahay, can you file a complaint with the police
The teacher
station
could report. Now, the common question here is that in private school, can you do that? Because under the law, it only provides your public school. Well, for me, what is the best interest? Yes, the teacher could also file even if it's in a private school.
Now, as a side question related to this, and maybe I'll ask this to Atty. Carlo. Let's say there's a teacher who's inflicting corporal punishment. Let's say ruler, pinapalo, or mga ganon. Are those cases of child abuse, or
Well, like the judge said earlier, it depends on the degree. But I think any physical contact by a teacher in the school setting will qualify as child abuse. And
kasi nung bata ko, medyo it was common.
Have a tough one. A tough one.
My age will show. But no, there were instances.
Or there were rumors of some teachers asking students to kneel sa mga munggos.
Well, that's a corporal punishment, so definitely
So that would,
that's
right
child
now,
abuse.
it would qualify as child
Yes,
abuse.
and the DepEd already has guidelines.
Good.
What
This
about
is-
yung mga regulations in schools that I've encountered this na if your hair is too long, sila mismo magugupit.
Oh,
Yeah.
I've heard of those
So
types
yan,
of schools
mga cases of
na-
child abuse yan, di ba?
Yes,
it
is
could
that
cause
child abuse?
psychological injury to the child,
Yeah.
and definitely.
And this one, I'm not kidding. This really happened to me when I was prep. One of my classmates was punished. The teacher put down his pants.
Oh,
in front of the class.
definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
See, Rod, and that was
Psychological
prep,
trauma.
That was prep. That was prep
several
10 years
decades
ago.
You have a sharp memory.
That was just 10 years ago.
For
Imagine that.
grandfather. I'm just
Wow.
So definitely, if it caused psychological injury to the child.
So yeah, mga
yes.
cases
And
yan.
I guess we
okay.
have to clarify to our viewers that child is actually anyone below 18.
Below 18
So
or those who cannot, or even over but cannot
Take care of
themselves
So
because of
yung mga-
disabilities.
Okay, so there you have like mga special children
Yes,
or some
absolutely.
with conditions.
Yes.
They can be considered as children under the
also.
law. But I guess those who are high school children here below 18, if you encounter any of these practices in your school that can be considered as child abuse, you as maybe a 17-year-old, you can report that to the police or to the DSWD.
Yes. And, okay. So that we know, Ren. I mean, for our televiewers, how serious this is. What are the penalties? What penalty? You were mentioned earlier. It's not even. It doesn't fall under. It's not even barangay.
No.
It's what are
Serious
the range?
penalties,
The range.
yeah.
What are the
Well,
penalties?
for instance, in Section 10A, if we say cruelty is the most common, or neglect, the penalty is prison mayor.
And that would be how many
6
years?
years and
judges?
1 day to 12 years.
Wow.
Now, if
Even
it's
up
just
to
one
12
case,
years,
just one act.
you cannot do probation with that. So it's more than
Yeah.
6 years. So, and then we have sexual abuse. If it's sexual abuse, then the penalty is up to reclusion temporal, meaning 12 years and 1 day to 20 years.
Wow.
And
So
Judge
imagine the penalty so
Elisa,
high.
since you're talking about how serious the penalties are, I think our viewers should be aware of some special laws like the anti-trafficking in persons
Yes.
law that are very strict, that you can't even be in the same room as a child, right? If you're a stranger, meaning you're not a parent,
Yes.
kunwari, you're just you're nagmamagandang loob ka na sige, pakainin ko tong street child na to. If you're alone in a room with this child, there is a presumption that there's a violation,
Yes.
right?
So perhaps it could be attempted trafficking in person, and the penalty is 15 years.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
So we have to be very
How
careful.
about the new ones? The new you mentioned the new laws, no? Like voyeurism. I guess there's some cyber crimes you can commit with a child. would you know, Attorney Carlo, ano yung mga more or less the penalties there? Kasi yan ang nagiging common ngayon, no? Or maybe
And
Judge
be
Elisa,
careful, I
yeah,
suppose,
yeah,
no? When
yeah.
you're taking videos
Yeah.
of children, kahit sabihin mo na, no, there was
Harmless,
nothing but,
harmless lang, oo.
but then it might be considered as voyeurism or...
I'm not familiar with the penalties, but what I can tell you is this: it's not. If you can get charged not only under one law, but one act can be you can be
Multiple.
convicted for several violation of several laws for the same act.
Yeah.
Okay, so it doesn't exclude.
And like you said, the anti-trafficking law itself is already strict.
Yes.
Well, the other laws are similarly strict. So you can be.
But safe to say, Judge Elisa, these new crimes, no, in involving cyber crime against children, it's medyo
Very
marami
high
rin
penalty.
din yan.
Like what Attorney Carlo mentioned a while ago, the anti-child pornography. You know, if it's made by a syndicate, then the penalty, I think, is reclusion perpetua. And then if it's an ordinary one, the penalty, I think, is up to reclusion temporal, which is, again, 12 years and 1 day to 20 years. Very high.
Maybe I can just mention this. We have the recent case. We assisted the victim, who was the victim of, and the perpetrators were charged with both violation of the Anti-Child Abuse Act and the anti-trafficking.
Wow.
One perpetrator was convicted. Both counts got life imprisonment for both.
So it's serious, huh? Serious. So this is something very serious.
Yeah, and I guess
think
for
it's just right.
those watching, be careful of. Basically, you have to know what would be constituted as child abuse or violations of special laws relating to children.
Okay, we still have some questions from our viewers. From Jonah, what is the difference between child abuse and physical injury? What if physical injury was done by a minor who was 5 years older than the other? What can be filed against him? So a minor, let's say,
Against
17-year-old,
another minor.
fights a 12-year-old,
Yeah. Okay. I love this question considering that we already discussed about 9344, the CICL, or Child in Conflict with the Law. Now, definitely, physical injuries are under 7610 can only be committed by adults. So, meaning, if the offender is a CICL or a minor, the regular penal laws, which is the revised penal code, shall apply. So, meaning, perhaps it depends on the degree, slight, less serious.
Depends on the degree of the injury.
Yes.
And to clarify to our viewers, CICL means children in conflict with the law. So when it comes to child abuse per se under the child abuse law, it has to be an adult.
It has to be an
18
adult.
and
The
above.
offender has to be an adult.
Okay, all right.
We have another question from Brian. Is it considered child abuse if I have a relationship with a minor? My girlfriend is 17 years old and I am 20. We met in high school. She was 13 then and I was turning 17. But we only became a couple last year. Her mother disapproves of our relationship and has threatened to file a case of child abuse against me.
Very interesting question. Yeah.
I
What a
will
mom, no?
report you for child abuse.
All right, so adults, even if you're 18, 19, 20, as long as your partner is below the age below 18, and then there is enticement, there is inducement for the girl to have sexual intercourse or di kaya naman lascivious conduct, that is child abuse. Now, how do we say it? Like for instance, just an example, if you say that I will marry you, I will, don't worry if something happens, I will marry you, then there is probable cause already because you enticed the minor to have sex with you.
Okay.
All right? Now, for instance naman, if the adult will give naman money, that is another, or induce the child to have sex with the adult, that is also sexual abuse.
Pag walang inducement and it's consensual, the relationship is consensual, or walang sexual intercourse, boyfriend and girlfriend lang.
17 years old girl.
19-year-old
consensual.
and a 17-year-old.
Well, ang nangyayari kasi dyan is, strictly speaking, when we say probable cause, if a file yan, and then let them battle it out in court to prove that there is really abuse. But if there is none, perhaps it could fall under seduction under the revised penal code.
Basta the rule is 18 and below.
And student-teacher relationship.
Below 18.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It can also fall under the
Yes,
sexual
abuse.
harassment law.
Well, that's one law.
Okay.
So, but I guess easiest rule of thumb for
18.
boys, especially for men out there, basta below 18 yung babae, try to wait until they reach the
Very
age
important.
of majority.
Magic
which is
number.
18.
All right.
What's that?
Yep. Well, I wouldn't say magic number. I would just say the legal number. I'm sorry.
Make sure
Apologize for
they're
that. And from Heidi, what do our laws say about children working? What if the reason why the child is working is because he or she decided for themselves that they will work to help their family? Is that still the fault of the parents and therefore a form of child labor? So children working sa mga sari-sari store, I guess. Or
Okay.
And this is relevant. I've seen some kids, especially ngayong Christmas season, sa mga bazaars, helping out in the bazaars, also selling. Is that allowed?
So let us distinguish.
Let's
Okay.
qualify,
There is an amendment to RA 7610 when it comes to child labor that children who are below the age of 15, they are generally not allowed to work. So talagang hindi sila pwede magtrabaho except one is if they would be under the supervision of the parents. And then second, syempre, yung mga showbiz, ang dami mga minor. But they have to comply strictly with the requirements provided under that law. Now, for those who are above 15, pwede naman. But, of course, what is their best interest? Syempre, yung ating yung survival, they have to also be given, the right should also be protected.
And make sure that their schooling is not
Yes,
interrupted.
yes, yes. You know, like for instance, our show, A Little Stars, there's provision that they have to study also. Even if it's out of school, then they have to comply.
With homeschool. Okay. Before we say goodbye to our guests, since again, sorry, it's Christmas season talaga. I am stuck on that Christmas season. But we were discussing with, marami talagang inaanak. But we were discussing with Attorney Carlo because I know some friends as well who like to reach out to the children during Christmas season. They either sponsor some mga orphanage, yung mga reach out projects. Perhaps, Attorney Carlo, as a member of the SWD, you can share to the public ano yung guidelines that need to be observed in order to have fundraisings or activities with children.
Well, for fundraising, there's a law that I think a lot of people are not aware of. If you're going to solicit funds from the public, you have to get a permit from the DSWD. Even if you, well, this is relevant also in times of calamities. Well, if you're
initiating something, if you're initiating something, say on Facebook or whatever.
If you have a relief drive and you're going to if what you're going to get you're going to use for a charitable cause, you have to get a permit from the DSWD.
And is it difficult to get a permit?
Well, it's not. All you have to show is that what do you intend to use it for, and we do it to protect the public because this could be used for abuse. Some unscrupulous people may get contributions and instead of really giving it to those people in need and keep it for themselves. So we want to ensure that what they say they will use it for, they will actually use it for.
Okay. And if you're gathering street kids na gusto mo silang pakainin, you still have to get a permit from them.
No. That's only if you're going to get funds, from the public.
But if you're going to take them with you,
money, well, you're free to do that. You don't need any special permit. Of course, you cannot force them if they're willing to go with you.
Kasi nga baka makidnapping ka.
Trafficking ka naman.
Thank you so much, Judge Elisa Sarmiento Flores and Attorney Carlo Florendo Castro for being with us tonight and helping us answer viewers' questions as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Legal Help Desk will return, so stay tuned. Welcome back to Legal Help Desk, and we are now joined by Ned Olney, Country Director of Save the Children. Good evening, Ned.
Good evening.
Thank you for joining us
Pleasure
tonight.
to have you.
Thanks for having me. It's great.
Yeah.
Earlier, we were talking about just the rights of children in the Philippines, but now we have more of a broader picture because also someone helping from an international perspective.
Yes, and you're part of an organization called Save the Children. It's an international organization. Can you tell us a little bit more about Save the Children?
Yeah, it's the largest and oldest independent organization for children. And you know what is interesting about the conversation tonight about Save the Children is that Save the Children was born out of mass starvation in Central Europe after World War I, so 1919.
Okay.
And I think what's interesting about that is there was a large conversation that went on in Europe about rights in general, about the rights of children and how claiming rights, identifying rights was critically important because millions of children died. And I think if we reflect on what's going on here in the Philippines now, we just had a terrible national tragedy with Haiyan. And I think that same reflection is going on here about what did we learn from that experience and what legal changes might be required to make a difference for the future, for future generations.
Right. And in connection with that, I think your organization is helping support a new House bill.
That's right, yeah.
Can you tell us more about this House bill?
This House Bill 5062?
And where it's at and
absolutely. First of all, they just changed the number of the law, of the bill, excuse me. It's 5285.
Okay.
And it just passed out of the Committee of the Welfare of the Child with Representative Cerriles as the chairperson for that committee. It passed consensus. Everyone in the committee supported it, signed on. There are now 40 congressmen, representatives who've signed on. It's on second reading in the House. So if any changes were to take place, it would take place now before it moves to the third reading. And then in the Senate, it's just starting the committee work, probably in January. But there are 5 senators who've submitted similar bills. So we've got 5 senators and 40 congressmen. So there's a huge amount of support for this right now.
But then, now that it seems like it's moving along in both houses, what makes this House bill different from the current laws we already have? Because there are several laws
already in place,
currently existing geared towards children. You have the child abuse law, anti-child abuse law, violence against women and their children, and then of course you have the revised penal code. So what makes this bill special?
Well, I think what we did with some of the members of Congress and some of our allies in Congress is after Haiyan, we kind of stepped back and said, how did these laws work? These were on the books. How did it work? And what's there to really protect children in emergencies? I think if you look at 7610, the anti-discrimination law, exploitation, abuse, and discrimination, that really focuses only on children in armed conflict. It doesn't say anything about children in emergencies.
Calamities or natural disasters.
Which is what happens a lot to the Philippines.
And if you look at law 10-121, that's
more disaster risk reduction.
Disaster risk reduction and management. That's exactly right. It only talks about children as a vulnerable group, but there are no actual interventions or recommendations on how to protect children in emergencies.
No mandated action.
There's no mandate.
All right.
And if we look across all of the executive agencies, DSWD, the Department of Health, Department of Education, they have lots of very progressive policies. But there was no whole of government approach to protecting children in emergencies. So I think what the Congress people and Representative Cerriles, Representative Yap, and others said, we need to have a single law which protects children. And I think that's the fundamental basis of this, to say, if we had this law, we will be able to save more lives in the future.
And correct me if I'm wrong. I guess the context of this is one is that they're the most vulnerable when it comes to natural calamities, and two, they still have a future. I mean, we have to protect their future, right? Is that the whole context?
Universally vulnerable. That's the difference of children. They're not just small adults. They're more vulnerable adults. They need special protection. I think the Convention on the Rights of the Child, by the way, the Convention on the Rights of the Child was initially conceptualized by the founder of Save the Children. She said, we must claim certain rights for children and labor for their universal recognition. And I think that's what we're doing here right now in the Philippines, is saying we have certain rights. What are those certain areas that we need to specifically mandate in law that all agencies would then have to
to observe
to
or comply
observe,
with.
yeah.
I'd like to share my experience here with working with the Presidential Assistant for Rehabilitation and Recovery, because Save the Children actually sent several questions asking, are these needs being addressed in relation to children? So
I
those
heard
were
you asked
taking
a tough question.
Yes,
Yeah,
we did. So those were taking into account when drafting the comprehensive rehabilitation and recovery plan for responding to Yolanda. But with respect to this new bill that you are supporting, can you give us some highlights? Like what types of interventions
Specifics, I guess,
or basically
More specific
needs are
actions, I
being
guess.
addressed?
First of all, it mandates a national plan. So within 90 days of signing it into law, DSWD and the Office of Civil Defense must begin a planning exercise on behalf of the government, including the police, the armed forces, Department of Health, Department of Education. So preparedness saves lives, no question about it, but preparedness
for
for
them,
children.
for the children, yeah.
So really outlining what needs to be prepared, what sort of actions would take place, how to implement for children. So comprehensive national plan for children, that's one. I think one of the lessons learned from Haiyan was that there was a huge number of displaced people. And sometimes those displaced people were put in evacuation centers, were schools.
Yes.
And sometimes those schools were used as evacuation centers for a long period of time.
Which deprives the children.
Which deprives children of school. Children's future is closely related to their education. They can't move on with their lives unless they have an education. They can't get back to a sense of normalcy. So what this law says is, fine, we understand that schools need to be used as evacuation centers, but it shouldn't be it shouldn't be the first choice. And if it's the only choice, after 30 days, the municipality will then open up a dialogue as to what other options are there. They have to identify other options for the evacuees.
Or perhaps make that law better by allotting for each area in the Philippines funding requirements for them to have a proper evacuation center.
That's an option.
In a safe area.
The Department of Education, what's interesting is that has that policy right now that schools shouldn't be used as evacuation centers, but that's only for Department of Education staff. So
not for
DILG
everyone,
and everyone else sometimes doesn't necessarily respect the policies of DOE.
Ned, what about responding to disasters? So during the relief phase, when you're talking about evacuation centers, does this bill, when it becomes a law, does it mandate the separation of children from adults or from strangers, especially female children or even males against male adults?
Well, you know, I think in the law, in terms of preparing for an emergency, I think there's a lot of latitude to be able to put in that type of rules. That doesn't exist in the law, but in the bill currently, it talks about one, heightened surveillance around trafficking of children. One, it talks about reunification of children, so a more robust system for identifying separated children and reuniting them, so tracking families, that's all about child protection. So I think those two areas are critically important. And then during the planning process, we're hoping that they'll get more specific about how they set up their evacuation centers. But what it does mandate is that the government must track population data by age. So it must say, this is the number of children in our evacuation center. These are the ages. These are the sexes, the gender.
Ned, if there's anyone aside from the bill, I'm sure you're doing a ton of other work. I mean, I'd like to touch on trafficking specifically because this is a very serious matter, and personally it bothers me. But if someone knows or has some information regarding human trafficking, can they go, for example, to Save the Children? And if so, what can you provide them?
I mean, if they came to us, we would immediately alert the authorities. I mean, I would suggest that anyone listening to this program that if you have information about trafficking, DSWD, the police, that's the place where action is going to really take place. If they came to us, we would immediately take them to the police if there was valid, actionable information there. I think in emergencies, we know from around the world that the opportunity for exploitation and trafficking goes way up. We didn't see that in Haiyan. We haven't seen that so far in Ruby, but it requires a system, planning, vigilance, all of those things from day one, because that's when the opportunity for exploitation takes place.
So to some extent, we did a good job in ensuring that we prevent that from happening, right?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it was very helpful to also get assistance from agencies or entities like Save the Children.
And I understand you've been around since 1919, is it?
Yeah, so you're about, what, 4 years
not
shy
not you personally, but
I've been maintained very well. It's makeup. It's the makeup.
Ned is over 100 years. No, but yeah, your organization is actually 4 years shy from your 100 years.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. We're coming up on our 100th anniversary, and we say we've been fighting for children's rights since the very beginning. Our founder wrote the Children's Charter, was the first document which enunciated rights for children. At that point in time, children could be bought and sold. They were property. They didn't have the right to an identity. They didn't have right to citizenship.
They were chattel.
They were chattel. They could be bought and sold. And so our founder said, no, that's not appropriate. If we are going to make a difference in the world, if we're to progress, we need to identify those rights of children. So.
Thank you again. Thank
Thanks
you,
so much,
Ned.
Well, we
My pleasure.
Talk with you on and on, but unfortunately, we're running out of time.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for extending your help to the Philippines. We really value it. So again, we have Ned Olney, Country Director for Save the Children. And
well, that's all the time that we
very
have.
enlightening. Good luck with that bill that you're pushing for.
Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you again, Ned. That's all, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for tonight. We'd like to thank our viewers who keep on sending us your legal questions via social media. I'm Attorney Rod Nepomuceno.
And I'm Attorney Karen Jimeno. If you have any questions about our topic for tonight, you may post these on our Facebook and Twitter pages. Join us again next Monday as we discuss your legal rights. Good night. Is this a form of child abuse or neglect? And second, what can we do to help the situation? Maybe si Attorney Carlos of the DSWD.
First of all, we don't encourage when children go begging that you give them the alms that they're asking for, because that will encourage them to go begging again.
Right.
Okay. Now, if you're really concerned, maybe the best thing is to report it to the local social welfare development office of the city or municipality where you're living in, or to a DSWD office. Then we will send social workers to go look into the situation of the children who are begging. Well, if they're there because they have no parents to take care of them, then we will take them into our fold and put them into our protective custody. If they're not, if they have parents who are not taking care of them or letting them beg on the streets, then we will provide counseling to their parents and will make them realize that it's not healthy for their children. And if the parents refuse to stop letting their children beg in the streets, then we will have to take these children into our protective custody.
What about Christmas caroling? So obviously there are the obvious na street kids, like when your car is stalled waiting for a traffic light and then kids come up just to Christmas carol. That's obviously part of the street children problem. But if you have like a house, tapos formally you have kids really coming to render Christmas carols, is that a form of child labor? Judge Elisa.
Well, you know, when you say child labor, you are forcing children to go and work, actually to earn money. Now, caroling per se, it is created by the United Nations, and considering that we are a member country, then we have to make sure that the basic and the special rights of children are protected. Basic, when we say basic, we're talking about survival, we're talking about education, food and shelter, how they would be treated. But then when it goes to the special protection, now that's where the special laws concerning children in the judicial system or the justice system would take place. Now, particularly, we have RA 7610, which is the anti-child abuse law. And then we also have eliminating forms of violence against children. And then we also have a law wherein it states that children who are below 15 years old cannot work, except with exceptions. Okay? So aside from that, we also have RA 9208, trafficking, the anti-trafficking in person, which is, it has a provision in terms of child trafficking. So that's the case wherein the organized criminals got children from the southern part of Luzon.
Right.
They go to a part of Manila and they distribute them so that they could beg. Our office before charged the felons who were arrested for trafficking.
And I think, as Attorney Carlo mentioned, if you encounter any cases like these, you can report to the DSWD as well for the protection of the children, apart from just going to court.
I could add to the laws. There are some more recent laws which adapt to the times and technology. There's the Anti-Voyeurism Act. There's the
Children are supposed to be our future. They are important assets to any nation. Unfortunately, thousands of them are living a life that is less than perfect from what an ideal childhood is. In 2013, the PNP Directorate for Investigation and Detective Management reported that 4,234 children were raped. What's even more disturbing is that 406 of these cases were committed by teenagers. In addition, the Criminal Investigation and Detection Group reported that most victims met their assailants through the internet. In fact, the National Bureau of Investigation reported that of all the cybercrime cases they handled, 46% of them are related to online child abuse. In 2012, the Department of Social Welfare and Development recorded 5,554 cases of child abuse, 500 less than the number of cases reported in 2011. And these figures are just in the Philippines. The number of violations against children has raised so much since the United Nations created the Convention on the Rights of Children in 1989. The convention required member states to acknowledge the basic and special rights and needs of children. However, not all of these rights and needs
It's not a form of, it's really not a form of child labor, considering that it's for the spirit of Christmas. However, if the child is being used in order for, to get money, adults would use them to get money, then that could be also a form of child abuse.
So if you're an organization, for instance, and you organize children, and obviously I've received some letters soliciting, can we conduct Christmas carols in your house or in your office, and then obviously it's in return for money or donations. Is that a form of child labor?
No, I don't think so, because that is for the spirit of Christmas. But we have, I have encountered a case where there is actually, I think it's an organized crime syndicate that used children to beg during the Christmas season.
Yeah, that seems to be the common thought, no? I mean, whenever we're driving and we see children begging, and usually, someone will tell you, don't give because it's a syndicate.
Yes.
I think it's safe to say not all naman are
yes.
With certain syndicates. Now let's take a step back. Now we're talking about children. Let's talk about what are the laws, no, that protect children. And two, my second question is, how is this enforced? Because they're children, they can't really go to court or file a case. They don't know the legalities. Let's start off with maybe perhaps the International Convention on the Rights of Children and perhaps the vows you don't know. What are the laws that are pertinent to the protection of children, and thereafter, how is this enforced?
Now, when we talk about the Convention on the Rights of the Children,
Needs are recognized by certain individuals, groups, and countries around the world. What are the rights of children and how is the Philippine government protecting them? With childcare being so sensitive, where's the line drawn when it comes to discipline and abuse? And with the advancement of technology, how can a parent protect their child from new forms of abuse? Good evening. You're watching Legal Help Desk. This show is about making the law work for you by giving legal advice on topics that matter to you. I'm Attorney Karen Jimeno.
And I'm Attorney Nepomuceno. Tonight we'll discuss the legal rights of children, what you need to know about the rights of children and the youth, and how to protect them from any acts of violation such as abuse, neglect, and exploitation, just to name a few.
Our guests for tonight are Judge Elisa Sarmiento Flores of the RTC Branch 71, Pasig City, and Attorney Carlo Florendo Castro of the Department of Social Welfare and Development. Good evening, and thank you for being with us, Attorney Carlo and Judge Elisa.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. We know it's traffic, but and it's because it's Christmas time, and because it's Christmas time, children are normally the focus of the season,
Yes,
right?
Yes.
of course.
So,
And most kids are blessed enough to have parents that will make sure that they really experience, diba? Christmas as a really good
The joys
and happy
of Christmas,
holiday.
yeah.
But I think it's also when Christmas season rolls around when we see a lot of street children
Yes.
around, either selling or nanlilimos or begging in the streets or even caroling. So basically, perhaps you can enlighten our viewers. One,